U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said the United States is prepared to walk away from mediating peace talks between Ukraine and Russia unless there is progress in the coming days. Rubio was speaking in Paris after holding discussions with European allies on reaching a ceasefire. He added that President Donald Trump is still interested in peace, but the U.S. has many other priorities.
Very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is the war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done. You know, we'll do what we can on the margins. We'll be ready to help whenever you're ready to have peace. But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end.
Well, earlier I spoke to Fabrice Pothier, the CEO of Rasmussen global think tank, who told me he is not surprised by Marco Rubio's comments.
I don't think so. I think it's been clear from the onset that the Trump administration would be extremely transactional and will have, I would say, a short attention span. We try to make a deal on terms that are obviously not always favorable to Ukraine. But if they see that that deal is not possible, they will just exit the situation. And this is obviously a great risk for both Ukraine and Europe. And I think this is what President Putin has understood pretty well. And the reason why he's not really changing his both political but also military posture. And he continues to proceed ahead in his military campaign to try to grab as many kilometers square in Ukraine, whilst not giving much on the diplomatic negotiation table.
Yeah, and to that point then, the U.S. appears to have hit a roadblock in its push to bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. Does this meeting perhaps signal the U.S.'s openness to now bringing in the Europeans into the negotiations?
I'm not sure it's into the negotiations. I think it's more a kind of better sequencing between what the Americans are doing in terms of high-level bilateral negotiations with the Russians and what the Europeans are trying to do with the Ukrainians to lay out the terms of how to keep this peace, if there is ever a peace agreement. So I think it's a better connection between these two dimensions, but I don't think this means that the Europeans are brought to the negotiation table.
Thank you.
So what is, just maybe reiterate for us again, Fabrice, what does Europe need from the White House in this situation? There is a sense that Europe cannot shoulder this on its own, cannot bring this war to an end on its own without the support of the United States, even in the eventual situation that the war is ended. The U.S. is still needed. In what ways is the White House critical for the Europeans in this?
Yeah. I think it's critical in two ways. One is in striking some terms of a peace agreement that are not putting Ukraine into a vulnerable position, at least not vulnerable to the extent where peace will be challenged in 6 months, a year, 2 years, or Ukraine's sovereignty and independence will be so weak that actually it will not be able to operate as an independent entity. So I think the terms of the peace are quite critical, and this is where the US is the only one with the leverage vis-à-vis Russia to strike the right terms. It's not about territory only, it's about sovereignty and about independence, about economic future. First thing. Second thing, if there is indeed a peace agreement that is just and that is sustainable for Ukraine, the Europeans and Ukrainians will need some form of US support into the reassurance peacekeeping force, for the lack of better expression, because without the US direct or indirect support to European and Ukrainian forces that will keep that peace, it's likely that the Russians will want to challenge it and will want to undermine it.
Fabrice, just very quickly, Rubio says something that stuck out to me. He says here, whether or not this is a war that can be ended. Does this say anything into the thinking about Washington perhaps looking at the possibility of throwing in the towel?
Exactly, that's what I was saying. I think this is an administration with a rather short attention span. We see that also on the trade war. President Trump on the 2nd of April launched this big Liberation Day, and then a few days later, because the markets are wobbling, he's already putting it on hold. So this is an administration that goes hard and big, but then kind of turn to something else. And here there's a real risk that Trump will get tired of Russia lack of diplomatic compromise and of the situation, and will just want to exit the U.S. contributions and role in the Ukraine war, in the war in Ukraine. And this is a real risk for obviously Ukraine, because there is still a level of dependence for U.S. contributions in the military campaign, but also for the Europeans who will find themselves on their own.
All right. Fabrice, Pothier, thanks so much for that. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
CEO at Rasmussen Global Think Tank.